People think retirement is mostly a buying decision. What should I own? What should I invest in? What should I add before the paycheck stops? That is how the financial world trains people to think. Buy more insurance, buy more products, buy more diversification, buy more protection, buy more square footage for the dream, buy more of the future before time runs out. I understand why accumulation feels like progress. It feels responsible. It feels like love for your future self. But I have lived long enough to know that a great many people do not enter retirement lacking assets. They enter retirement carrying too much life, too much house, too much maintenance, too much clutter, too much complexity, too much identity tied to old obligations, too many expensive objects that no longer create joy equal to the effort they demand, too many accounts, too many decisions, too many reminders of the life they had to manage while they were working and raising a family. Then they stop working and wonder why freedom still feels crowded. That is the wrong kind of retirement. If you do retirement, well, the point is not simply to preserve your money. The point is to recover your time, your attention, your energy, and your peace. Those things matter just as much as the portfolio. Sometimes more. A lot of people spend 40 years building a structure that makes perfect sense for the middle of life. Children in the house, job in the foreground, 2 cars, full garage, complicated calendar, memberships, side projects, deferred dreams sitting in corners, papers, plans, tools, toys, all the visible evidence that life was busy and important and moving. Then one day the kids are gone, the commute stops, the calendar softens, the body gets a little more honest about what it enjoys and what it merely tolerated, and yet the structure remains. That is where the trouble begins. I remember hearing about an older woman who had spent decades filling her house with everything she had ever bought, saved, clipped, collected, delayed, preserved, or could not quite bring herself to release. The house was so crowded, it stopped feeling like a home and started feeling like an archive of unfinished decisions. Eventually, her life changed, and she had to move into a much smaller living space. One of the people visiting her expected grief. Instead, she said something that stayed with me. She admitted that some days she missed parts of the old house, but most days she just felt free. That sentence has more wisdom in it than many retirement seminars. Most days I just felt free. That is a retirement principle. A person can spend years assuming that more possessions mean more security, more room, more proof, more success, more comfort, then later discover that many of those possessions were not supporting the life at all. They were sitting on it. That is why when people ask me what they should do before retirement, I do not begin only with what to buy. I begin with what to sell. Not because I believe deprivation is wise, not because minimalism is a religion, not because everything old must be discarded for the sake of appearing clean and modern. I begin there because subtraction is one of the most underrated financial and emotional tools in the whole retirement process. A good retirement is not an attic. It is not a storage unit for every past season of your life. It is not an ongoing maintenance contract with everything you once accumulated while being too busy to notice the full carrying cost. A good retirement is a deliberate environment built around what you still truly value. That means some things deserve to come with you. Other things do not. The hard part is that the wrong things are rarely hard to identify economically. They are hard to identify emotionally. That is where most people get trapped. So let me tell you how I would think about it if I were helping someone simplify before retirement. I would not begin with a spreadsheet. I would begin with one question. Does this still serve the life I am actually about to live, or does it mainly serve the life I already lived? That question changes everything. A very large house may have been perfect when 3 children were moving through it. Guests were constant, and school calendars turned the whole place into a logistics center. Does it still serve 2 people and occasional visitors? The second or third vehicle may have been sensible when 2 careers were operating at full speed. Does it still serve a life without commuting? The complicated investment structure may have been tolerable when you were still in accumulation mode, and complexity felt impressive. Does it still serve you when simplicity, taxes, distribution planning, and ease of management matter more? The boat, RV, motorcycle, trailer, timeshare, or large hobby inventory may have once represented possibility. Does it still produce enough real pleasure to justify the cost, effort, and attention? Now, the side business or rental property may have once felt like a smart extension of your working identity. Does it still fit a stage of life where time, predictability, and peace may now be worth more than incremental gross return? That is the frame. Not whether something was ever justified, whether it still belongs. People often keep the wrong things because they ask the wrong question. They ask whether the item used to matter. Of course it used to matter. That is not the issue. The issue is whether it still earns its place in the next chapter. There is a huge difference between a thing that was right before. Let us start with the biggest one, because for most households it is not even close. The house. I have met plenty of people whose homes appreciated nicely over time, whose mortgages were either low or gone, and whose friends assumed they were in perfect shape for retirement because the address looked impressive and the equity looked large. But equity is not the whole story. A house is not just an asset. It is also a machine that consumes time, utilities, taxes, insurance, repairs, decisions, labor, and mental bandwidth. When people are still working hard, a lot of those carrying costs disappear into the larger noise of life. There is already stress. There is already motion. There is already a long list of obligations. One more repair issue or seasonal chore gets absorbed into the general rhythm. Retirement changes that. The same house can suddenly feel louder. You notice the stairs more. You notice the unused rooms more. You notice the heating bill more. You notice the yard work more. You notice the roof, the plumbing, the gutters, the windows, the snow, the leaves, the little things that are not little when they keep returning. A house that once felt like success can begin to feel like a job you forgot to quit. That is why downsizing is not merely a real estate transaction. For many people, it is a lifestyle correction. I once spoke with a couple who had raised their children in a beautiful home full of exactly the right memories: holiday dinners, school pictures, birthday noise, late-night homework, guests, pets, all the good chaos that justifies the size and complexity of a family house. When the children left, the couple stayed, partly because the house still meant something, and partly because leaving felt almost like betraying the years they had spent building that life. That feeling is understandable, but emotion and fit are not the same thing. Over time, the house stopped feeling sentimental and started feeling managerial. One broken thing after another. Higher property taxes, insurance creeping upward, more rooms than they ever entered, more cleaning than they wanted, more upkeep than they admitted. They were not enjoying the home as much as they were preserving it. That is an expensive difference. Eventually they sold, moved to a smaller place with better walkability, lower costs, fewer headaches, and more liquidity. What changed was not only the budget, their posture changed. They looked lighter, they traveled more. They withdrew less from investments because their overhead was lower. They spent less time supervising the structure around their life and more time using life itself. That is what a well-timed downsize can buy. And the ripple effects are bigger than many people realize. A smaller place can mean lower utilities, lower insurance, lower maintenance, lower property taxes, sometimes lower state taxes if the move involves geography, not just square footage. Sometimes it means unlocking home equity that can sit in liquid form, reduce withdrawal pressure, supplement future care needs, or simply increase peace. Sometimes it means moving nearer to the things you actually use and farther from the things you only maintained out of habit. Now, I am not telling everyone to sell the family home. Some people truly love where they live and can maintain it comfortably. Some homes are exactly right for aging in place. Some households gain more than they lose by staying. Fine. The point is not to worship downsizing. The point is to stop treating staying as the automatic moral choice. You do not win retirement points for dying in the largest house. You win by building a life that fits your real needs without quietly draining your future. The second major category is transportation. This sounds small until you price it correctly. Most households carry more vehicle costs than they admit because they look only at the monthly payment or the original purchase price and ignore the surrounding ecosystem. Insurance, registration, maintenance, repairs, fuel, depreciation, tires, surprise problems, the cost of parking. The simple fact that a car sitting unused still costs money to own when people are both working. Multiple vehicles often make perfect sense. Different schedules, different commutes, child logistics, time sensitivity, emergency flexibility, all of that is real. Retirement changes the operating logic. Suddenly there is more scheduling flexibility. One errand can wait until the other spouse returns. Appointments can be coordinated. Grocery trips do not need to happen at rush hour. There is often less need for duplication and more room for planning. Yet many couples never examine the question honestly because two cars became normal years ago and normal gradually transformed into sacred. I am always suspicious of the word normal in finance. Normal is how expensive habits disguise themselves. I know a couple who assumed they could never function on one vehicle until they actually tried it after retirement. At first it felt awkward because the routine had not yet adjusted. Then the routine adjusted. One day they realized that what they thought was necessity had mostly been unexamined convenience. Selling the extra vehicle reduced insurance, maintenance, and clutter in the driveway, and it also simplified the decision flow of their week. Again, this is not about proving moral superiority through inconvenience. It is about asking whether the second vehicle still earns its place. Sometimes it does, sometimes it does not. And if the answer is that keeping it only spares a few mild scheduling discussions each week, that may be a very expensive peace treaty. The same question applies to recreational vehicles too. Boats, RVs, motorcycles, trailers, ATVs, the sort of equipment people often acquire during working years because it represents freedom, future fun, or a dream identity that will supposedly blossom once time becomes available. I have nothing against fun. I am strongly in favor of fun, but a great many so-called fun assets become storage, intensive, maintenance, heavy, infrequently used bills with emotional branding. That is what people often fail to price. The yearly carrying cost. A boat is not only a boat, it is dock fees, winterizing, cleaning, upkeep, insurance, repairs, registration, fuel, and the ongoing tax of attention. An RV is not only a travel option, it is insurance, storage, maintenance, depreciation, tire replacement, seasonal issues, and the simple reality that if you only use it sparingly, the cost per day of actual joy can become absurd. The same is true for timeshares. Large hobby equipment, seldom used vacation gear, and all the other leisure categories that felt exciting when purchased and slowly became household overhead afterward. I once met a man who kept a beautiful fishing boat long after his enthusiasm for the entire routine had faded. What he still loved was the idea of himself as a boating man. What he did not love anymore was the hauling, the cleaning, the scheduling, the repair calls, and the constant low-grade expense. Yet he kept the boat because selling it felt like admitting the chapter had changed. That is exactly the kind of emotional trap retirement should help you escape. Retirement is not supposed to be a museum of old identities. If a toy still brings deep joy and is used enough to justify its space, cost, and upkeep, wonderful, keep it. But if you are paying to preserve a fantasies of use that has not then materialized for years, then the object is no longer an asset of enjoyment. It is a subscription to a story you stopped actually living. That brings me to another category that people often underestimate because it is not parked outside or stacked in the garage: financial clutter. This one causes less visible stress and often more lasting damage. There are retirees who have money in 10 or 15 accounts scattered across several institutions, old employer plans left where they were, legacy insurance products no one fully understands anymore, annuities bought in one decade and forgotten in the next, actively managed funds with fees that were tolerated during accumulation, and a general sense that the structure is sophisticated because it is complicated. I have never believed complication and sophistication are synonyms. Often they are opposites. A lot of products grow best for the person selling them, not for the person carrying them into retirement. Variable annuities with layers of cost, old whole life structures that may or may not still fit, mutual funds with fee loads that quietly skim performance, private or illiquid vehicles that make taxes and paperwork harder than the return justifies, scattered accounts across multiple custodians that create unnecessary management burden. None of these are automatically wrong, but retirement is the season where complexity deserves a more brutal review. Why? Because the goal is no longer merely to accumulate. The goal is to make the system easier to run, easier to understand, easier for a spouse to manage, easier for heirs to handle, and less expensive to maintain. Simplicity has real value, cost efficiency has real value, clarity has real value. I have seen people feel financially lighter not because they earn more, but because they finally consolidated. one IRA instead of 4, one taxable brokerage instead of 3, fewer legacy products, clear beneficiary designations, a much simpler map. Suddenly the financial life becomes legible. That matters when you are younger. It matters even more when you are older. There is another reason to care about this. The more complex the system, the easier it is for mediocre products to hide inside it. A 1% fee sounds small until it quietly compounds against you for years. A product that seemed clever in a sales presentation may feel less clever when you are the one still paying for its architecture decades later. Retirement is the stage to ask not whether the product can be defended by its brochure, but whether it deserves space in a cleaner life. That is a powerful test. The fourth category is broad physical clutter, and I do not mean that in the cheap way people use the word when they are really talking about trendy minimalism. I mean actual accumulated objects that consume space, cleaning, storage, guilt, and low-grade mental energy. You do not need to be a hoarder to be burdened by possessions. Most households accumulate far beyond what they consciously use. Furniture that no one sits on, boxes no one opens, collections no one actually enjoys anymore. Duplicate kitchenware, archive paperwork with no practical purpose, closets full of identity experiments, garages that became emotional landfills, stored gifts, inherited pieces, sentimental objects without a limit, all the quiet sediment of a long life. Each object may seem harmless. The total environment is not. I think people underestimate how much psychic pressure a crowded environment exerts. It is not dramatic, but it is real. More to clean, more to organize, more to avoid dealing with, more decisions postponed, more reminders of unfinished action, more evidence that the life around you is asking to be managed even when you are trying to rest. That is why so many people feel strangely better after decluttering, even when they expected to feel only loss. They do not only gain floor space, they gain mental space. Again, I am not romantic about empty rooms. Some possessions are beautiful, meaningful, and worth the care they require, but many others remain only because the moment of decision has been delayed for years. Retirement offers a rare opportunity to finally make that decision. What stays? What goes? What belongs in memory but not in square footage? What is being kept for actual use and joy, and what is being kept because throwing it away would force an emotional reckoning? That reckoning is often precisely what people... I have watched couples reduce the number of possessions in their home before retirement and discover that the resulting feeling was not deprivation but relief. They could find things, clean faster, move easier, imagine different housing options, hand less chaos to their children later, enjoy the home more because the home was no longer asking for so much attention. That is a very real dividend. One of the saddest patterns I see is when children are forced to sort through decades of unprocessed accumulation after a parent is ill, overwhelmed, or gone. That is not only a practical burden, it is an emotional one. Retirement is a chance to spare people that future by doing some of the sorting while you still have the health, will, and clarity to decide on purpose. The fifth category is harder because it often looks productive on the surface. The side business, the rental property, the little enterprise that once made sense and now mostly generates paperwork, the duplex that used to feel like smart diversification and now feels like tenant calls, repairs, vacancy risk, tax documents, and concentrated stress, the consulting arrangement that still pays but consumes more time and attention than you like admitting. The business line you kept because it made you feel useful, even though its economics or its burden no longer justify the drag. I am not against side businesses. I am not against rental properties. I know many people who have built meaningful wealth through them. But retirement changes the exchange rate between money and time. That is the crucial issue. During your working years, the side business may have felt empowering. Another stream, another option, another layer of security, the rental property may have seemed like productive leverage on the future. Now ask the retirement question. What am I really earning for the stress? That question is more sophisticated than it looks. A rental property that throws off cash flow but also creates phone calls, decision fatigue, repair risk, concentration, and mental occupation may look attractive on a spreadsheet while being much less attractive as a lifestyle asset. A side business can become a private boss you are too emotionally attached to fire. I once knew a man who owned a small duplex that had served him well during his accumulation years. He liked being the kind of person who had rental income. He liked the way it sounded and the discipline it represented. But by retirement, the property was not really buying him freedom anymore. It was buying him administrative responsibility. Tenants called repairs appeared. Taxes got messier. The property tied up capital in one local market. It occupied far more mindshare than the income alone justified. When he finally sold, the thing that surprised him was not the cash. It was the quiet. No more late night maintenance thought. No more vacancy anxiety. No more tiny emergency becoming a weekend obligation. He had transformed bricks and friction into liquidity and room that can be a very good trade in retirement. The same logic applies to any venture you are keeping, mostly because it once made you feel dynamic, needed, or smart. There is nothing wrong with continuing to work in retirement, if the work actually nourishes you. That is a different matter. What I object to is carrying complexity forward without repricing it. Everything should be repriced before retirement. The real question is not only, does this produce money? The question is, does the money more than justify the pressure, the time, the concentration risk, the paperwork, and the opportunity cost? Sometimes the answer is yes. Often it is less yes than people pretend. There is one more category I want to mention because it sits underneath all the others and makes them harder to release. Identity. A person is not only selling a house, a boat, a collection, or a business. Often he is releasing a self-story. The successful homeowner, the provider with a large family place, the car enthusiast, the landlord, the entrepreneur, the person with sophisticated financial arrangements, the collector, the helper, the one who is still essential. Retirement disturbs identity because it takes away one obvious answer to the question, what do you do? That makes people cling harder to the surrounding artifacts of their former life. The problem is that objects and obligations are lousy substitutes for purpose. Keeping the wrong house will not solve an identity problem. Keeping the second car will not solve it. Keeping the storage unit of memory disguised as utility will not solve it. Keeping the rental out of habit will not solve it. Those choices often delay the deeper work. Who am I when I am no longer simply performing the earlier role? That is a mature retirement question. If you do not ask it, you may keep funding old structures because they help you avoid it. So how would I actually decide what to sell? I would use a very plain test. First, does this still create proportionate joy or utility relative to its true cost? Not just the visible cost, the full cost: money, maintenance, space, attention, stress, taxes, friction. If joy is low and cost is high, the answer is usually already in front of you. Second, would I buy this again today? At today's total carrying cost for the life I am actually entering? That question is brutally clarifying. A lot of people would not buy again what they stubbornly keep. That tells you something. Third, what becomes possible if I let it go? This is the liberating question. People ask what they will lose. Fine, but they should also ask what opens up: lower withdrawals, more travel, a smaller tax burden, less worry, less spouse tension, more flexibility, more walking, better sleep. The future is not built only by what you keep. It is also shaped by what you stop carrying. And that, to my mind, is the deepest wisdom in retirement. Selling is not always loss. Sometimes it is conversion. You are converting trapped equity into usable life. You are converting maintenance into time. You are converting noise into peace. You are converting clutter into attention. You are converting a burden into options. That is a winning trade if done thoughtfully. I am not telling people to strip retirement to the bone. That would be foolish. Retirement should still contain beauty, pleasure, generosity, hobbies, and room for the things that genuinely matter. But the life should be designed, not inherited by default from the prior stage. That is the key. Do not let the old life roll automatically into the new one without inspection. That is how people spend their healthiest retirement years, managing structures they no longer even enjoy. Make the inspection now. Walk through the property. Sit in every room. Open the garage. Open the statements. Open the storage. Open the accounts. Open the schedule. And ask the honest question. What am I preserving because it still serves life? And what am I preserving because it is emotionally hard to admit the chapter changed? That is where the answers live. And if you are fortunate enough to have a spouse or partner in the picture, do this work together. Very often one person is more attached to the symbolism while the other person is carrying more of the labor. That imbalance can poison retirement quietly if it is not addressed before both people are living inside the consequences every day. Talk early, test ideas, run experiments. Live temporarily as if the second car is gone. Live temporarily as if the vacation property is not yours. Live temporarily with fewer possessions in one part of the house. Study how it feels. Relief is information. Do not ignore it. Most of the best retirement decisions I have seen were made before they became urgent. That is important. Selling under clarity is different from selling under pressure. Downsizing, while healthy and mobile, is different from downsizing because stairs became a crisis. Simplifying the accounts now is different from leaving the mess to a surviving spouse later. Letting go of the side business before resentment grows is different from being forced to do it after a health shock. Early, thoughtful subtraction is usually much kinder than delayed, reluctant subtraction. That is why I am in favor of action before necessity becomes obvious. Not reckless action, deliberate action. If you release the wrong thing, you can often adjust. If you cling too long to the wrong thing, you may lose more than money. You may lose years of energy, clarity, and usable freedom. And those are the exact things retirement was supposed to protect. So yes, people should think carefully about what to buy before retirement. They should build liquidity, resilience, good habits, and a sound portfolio. But that is only half of the equation. The other half is deciding what not to carry forward: the oversized house, the extra vehicle, the expensive toys and clutter, the high-fee financial tangle, the side business or property that became more weight than worth. For some people, there will be different items. But the principle remains: retirement works best when you stop funding yesterday's architecture and start building tomorrow's fit. That is how I would approach it. Not from fear, from clarity, not from austerity, from alignment, not from the fantasy that less is always better, from the observation that the right amount is better, and the wrong excess is expensive in more ways than one. By the time most people get to retirement, they do not need more proof. They need more room. Room in the budget, room in the calendar, room in the garage, room in the portfolio, room in the mind, room to travel, rest, serve, help, and enjoy. Room to be older without being overburdened. Room to discover which parts of life were always the point and which parts were just expensive scaffolding around it. That is what wise selling can buy. And in many cases, it buys far more than whatever object was worth on paper. It buys freedom you can actually feel.